This is the Craft Equation, where conversations about craft brewing, business, and culture all come together. I'm your host, Cameron, co-founder of Mother Earth Brew Co. Now let's crack one open and get into it. We have Ben Edmunds from Breakside Brewing. How you doing, Ben?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm about to be better because I'm about to open the collaboration IPA that we did together. So cheers.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
I unfortunately do not have one in front of me. I'm doing this from the road. My beer options are limited right now. Certainly no Breakside here in Michigan.
It's all good.
Nor Mother Earth, yeah. So you'll have to enjoy it.
I will do that. Let's get this thing topped off. By the way, everything you see here is available on our website, folks. 16-ounce glasses, flannel, and dry fit hat, all available at motherearthbrewco.com/store. Ben, let's get into it. So the topic of today's podcast, this is our first, by the way, super excited.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Happy to kick it off.
Yeah, thank you for being patient and getting through some of these initial stumbles with me. It's going to be a learning process, but I think we're going to have a lot of fun. It should be a good time. But the topic of today's show is collaborations. And this is obviously near and dear to our hearts. It's certainly relevant given the beer that we just showed, the collab that we just did together, Mother Earth and Breakside, the collaboration IPA. And today what we want to talk about is really what are collabs? What are the different facets of collabs? Why do we do them? Who do they serve? Why do consumers find them particularly interesting? And hopefully there's not just from the educational side of things, but folks on the brewery/suppliers side of things can take away from this conversation. And that's really what I wanted to do, is talk about this collab in particular, but then also mainly collabs at large. Why do we do them? And first of all, I know you guys have been open since 2010. And we'll tell the audience a little bit about what your role is over there, and that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I've been with Breakside since 2010. I wasn't one of the founders, but I was one of the first employees. So yeah, just celebrated my 15th anniversary a couple months ago.
Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a good ride. My role is to oversee all of our brewery operations. So all three of our production brewery and our two brew pubs. That puts me in charge of the production teams, the R&D teams, the quality team, packaging, warehousing, supply chain, all of that. So pretty much everything operationally that doesn't touch restaurants. And of course, then I'm the kind of liaison between the brewing side of the company and the retail, sales, finance, business offices.
Gotcha. And so when we're talking about collaborations, what's typically your level of involvement with it? There's obviously not one person involved in a collaboration, right? It takes an entire team. It takes operations, it takes logistics, it takes production, it takes marketing. And so it's a big undertaking. What on a personal level is typically your level of involvement when it comes to a collab like this? And real quick, just for the sake of clarity, there's a sliding scale in terms of how collabs work, the reach that they have. Obviously, you've done collabs anywhere from a 2-barrel system with a local brew pub all the way up to, gosh, I'm trying to think of the largest brewery we've collabed with. They're typically about your guys' side. They're like size breweries. Obviously, there's got to be some synergy there. And but anyway, with this one in particular, when we're talking about package that goes out to distribution versus just a real small batch type gig, what's your level of involvement?
Yeah, sure. So as far as if we're going to do a collaboration that's going to involve us, any kind of partnership that's going to involve making a beer, whether that be with another brewery, just a kind of more traditional collaboration, if we're doing something with a restaurant, if we're doing something with a nonprofit, that's all going to ultimately funnel through me in one way or another in terms of either both signing off on it, signing off on the partnership, signing off on both the creative side of it and the development of the beer and what the scope of the project is going to be, as well as then what the marketing responsibilities and what the expectation in the collaboration partnership is going to be, particularly if it's something beyond, like you're talking about, Cameron, like beyond a pub batch or something like that, which can be pretty straightforward. And we also have done collabs that range greatly in size, everything from a 3-barrel batch that we might brew for a specialty customer or something. I consider that a collab too. Some people might call that just kind of private label or that kind of project, but at some time there's still whatever that beneficiary is, whatever that partner is, you want that to have some synergy in terms of values, marketing, a story behind the beer, up to collabs that are, for us, I think maybe the largest we've done would be something in the 500 or 600 barrel range with a partner brewery where we're putting it out in the market and really treating it like one of our seasonal or rotating
Mhm.
beers.
How much do you guys really collaborate? Because I know
Yeah.
it really varies by brewery. There are breweries that
Yeah,
collab every other week, and there are breweries like us that really only collab, at least on this scale, once a year.
we're pretty open to it and do quite a bit. We have actually in the marketplace right now two beers that are rotating collaborations that will last for every 2 months or so, or maybe one to two beers that are out in the marketplace. So we're constantly doing some form of collab with someone in the market. We also have some beers that began as collab that have evolved into year-round beers. And of course, that's a kind of a whole separate dimension of this conversation too, is what happens after the collab,
Good
what
point.
becomes of those beers. But when we're talking about a smaller scale thing, again, I'm pretty open. I love the process of collaboration. I love the benefits of collaboration for us as a brewery, for us as a company. So we might get approached by someone who has an idea for a project they want us involved in, or it might be a visiting brewer who's coming through town during hop harvest, or it might be someone who wants us to come down and do a collab with them for similar to what we did with you guys, where we're not the host, but we're typically doing some sort of large scale, and by large scale here, let's say 300 barrels or so volume, at least once a quarter.
Okay. And that probably is representative of the average frequency in the industry. I would say that's reasonable. For any brewery that is involved in any type of regional production, it's challenging, I would say, to do it really effectively any more than that, unless you're sending shift brewers off to do smaller projects at satellite locations.
Yeah, exactly. We can do it at the pubs much more quickly. We're able to be nimble there in a way that in production things are set 45 to 60 to 90 days ahead of time. And having done some collabs with some much larger regional breweries, people who are in the kind of 200,000 barrel space, I do realize that for them, these types of things there's a lot more layers of complexity, a lot of hoops to have to jump through. So for them, it can be really hard to do a spontaneous collab. Or if they're able to, it's usually at the draft level or at the pub level, like you were saying.
Yeah, totally. Uh, Interesting. You brought we'll have to save that for a separate episode. I'd love to talk about it more, but when I was doing a little bit of homework on you guys, apart from what I know about you guys and your beers, but just about your company and its history, I saw that you guys have 7 or 8 locations. That's got to be a bear to manage. I'd love to talk to you about that on a different episode, just how that works.
Yeah, fortunately, we have a really, really great director of hospitality, director of restaurant operations, and he manages those locations. And then we have GMs at several of those that kind of oversee day to day. So yeah, it takes a full team to make sure that happens. I very fortunately do not have to manage the retail location.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good place to be. I did that for a long time. It's a lot of work, but we
Yeah.
will table that one for a different time. So
Yeah.
regarding the collabs, I know we talked a little bit about collabs in general, how those kind of come together. Um, there's also in terms of the definition of collaboration, right? And what the level of involvement of each brewery is. Um, like I said, I've been involved in many different collaborations of various sizes, all the way from back in the day when we used to go down and collab with Lee Chase at Blind Lady Ale House and Patrick Brew with the collab we did with the brewery. Those were so intimate and fun and craft, and they really captured the whole spirit of the collaboration. I remember when we were brewing with Lee, he had this Frankenstein system in the back of his, and he was actually mashing and lautering in a plastic tote. I don't even know where he got this thing, but it was so caveman, and his beers were so exceptional, and we were just blown away. And but it was
Cool.
very craft, very. We're mashing things with paddles. We're stepping on grape skins. It was all of a sudden someone pulls into the alleyway with a puncheon from some winery in the middle of nowhere. He's, let's throw it in here. There's probably Brett in there. It's wild. And then with Patrick blending stuff with a stick blender, there's stuff shooting all over the place. And I think that's probably the type of collaboration that like John Q. Public envisions when they think
Yeah.
about collaboration, and not to rain on their parade or take the spirit out of it but there are other situations and other types of collaborations where it just doesn't work like that. It can't work like that. A lot of times the recipe doesn't scale, and it can be a little bit more automated, if you will, and itself is happening more on the like R&D level than it is on the production floor. And I don't
Yeah.
know, maybe you could talk a little bit about what on your end in that way.
Yeah, I think that to me, the spirit of the collaboration is the creative process, right? And that can be whatever that kind of iteration of whether it be recipe design or trying to merge two styles together is more important than doing something that's wacky and out of the box. And sometimes I think that there was a point in brewing craft beer history where I think that the idea was like if you were doing a collab, you were trying to do something like wild or sui generis, like that hadn't been done before. Because otherwise, why would you get together? What would be the point of making an just an
Right, that we
IPA?
could,
And
yeah, I get it.
exactly. And oftentimes, more often than not, I think those beers didn't really turn out. They were experiments that people were basically using as experiments masquerading as these expert meetings of the mind, and they weren't that. And we certainly were guilty of a couple of those back in 2014, 2015. I think over time we ratcheted our way back away from a certain level of experimentation
We did. Yeah,
in
absolutely.
collaborations and really started to focus on, okay, how can we take advantage of these two breweries or three breweries' strength in a way that's going to make something that's really delicious and really appealing, even if it doesn't on the surface appear to be that novel per se.
Yeah, and that, again, not to dive too far down the rabbit hole, but that's a whole nother topic on its own, right? Is the evolution of like homebrew spirited beers and the awakening that the consumer has gone through going, wait a minute, and you use the perfect word, just because something's novel or different or funky or whatever synonym you want to use there, doesn't really make it good by any objective standard. And so people have gravitated toward more classic styles that are drinkable and frankly less risky from an investment standpoint, right? If you're going to drop anywhere between $15 and $25 on a 4-pack of beer, you better be pretty confident you're going to enjoy it. And so I think that's been the predominant state of mind.
Absolutely. And going back to your original question or kind of premise on this about what the collaboration materially looks like on a collab day or when the beer is being brewed, I think that there are a lot of different ways that can go down, and that can be a virtual meeting of the minds online where you're just talking through something, and we can then plug that into a production schedule where we basically collaborate entirely before brewing, right? On a recipe, on a cellar plan, on a ingredients list, and me coming to your brewery or vice versa just to throw some hops in the kettle. While that makes for a nice photo op, that isn't really the point of the collaboration from our perspective, right? And not to poo-poo the marketing side of it, and those things are important assets to send to the public, but I do think that realistically, the meat of the value for the breweries and where the quality is going to be driven from is not what's happening when you're running just a normal brew day, whether that be in production or the pub. Now, that said, too, someone's visiting town and they want to drop in and do a collab at one of our pubs, like we said before, that's pretty easy. We can do that as long as we have enough heads up and plug that in, and then they can be there for the brew day. And if someone wants to mash in themselves and weigh out the hops themselves, that's great. But for the most part, people were not requiring our collaboration partners to do that because that's what you're doing as a brewer already.
Yeah, I think people would be surprised to know too that it's not like Chris Baker, our director of brewing ops, is out there brewing every batch of Cali Creamin' every day, right? We've got shift brew to do that, and that goes for really any beer. Even when you look at breweries that are smaller that typically do all of the production themselves, meaning someone with a single brewer, right? Let's take a brew pub, for example. I've been to a couple collabs where they're triple batching 10 barrels into 30-barrel fermenters. They don't want to stick around for 3 brews any more than the visiting brewery does, because at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of cleaning and squeegeeing and pulling on levers. And so there's been a lot of instances where, like you said, we're there for the photo op or whatnot. And then by the time the first batch is done, we bail and we leave the rest of it to the shift brewers or whoever it is.
And from a respect for the work of the brewer, I think it's important to recognize, like, most brewers don't sit around having the time and bandwidth to host like 4 or 5 people just in the middle of their day.
Yeah.
We're not. I think that this is the romance of the collab day requires actually an infrastructure where you have a brewery who is big enough to basically allow someone to be a host. That's a labor cost for you, right? As a brewery right there. And typically, if I have a production brewer, I can't ask them to do that. I don't want to ask them to do that. That's just an extra burden for them on a day where they're, like you said, trying to knock out 3, 4 turns already, and having to make small talk while they're running CIPs on the HeatX does not make their day any easier. It doesn't give them joy as a collaborator.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. But I also want to talk about the business side of it, from just slapping 2 logos on the label. And I think most people understand it from a financial standpoint. It's the brewery who produces it that really, I mean, from a dollars and cents standpoint, stands to gain the most, right? But then, but then apart from that, there's obviously like the intrinsic value and the intangible value in a lot of ways of the collaboration and sort of the perceived, like, not even paying homage to the respect that craft brewers are expected to have for one another. And so you're reinforcing that for the average consumer. But there's also a street cred factor to it, right? And would you agree that, like, choosing breweries that you collaborate with is really important? It's not.
Yeah, there's so many motivations that might play into why you want to do a collab with someone or why you might not want to do a collab with someone. And some of those can be business driven, some can be vibes driven, some can be quality concerns or quality driven. There are breweries who are very conservative in what they do about collabs. They just don't do very many because they don't want to. It's easy. If you say no to most everybody, then it's pretty easy to say no. If you say yes to most everybody, it's hard to say no.
Yes. Yeah, great point.
And I think over the years, I've come to, we at one point had a document about what were the expectations, not expectations, but what were the criteria by which we would decide to do a collab with someone. And it's been interesting. Like, I didn't reread that in advance of this podcast, but I reread it a couple months ago when we were doing a couple of collabs, and 7 or 8 years had lapsed since I had put those notes down. It's interesting to see how my thinking then compares to where it is now. In general, I feel like there's very little downside to it. I think that the question of the credibility that you lend to someone else, if you're a bigger brewery or a more well-known brewery, that is an interesting thing. But that's, in some ways, I don't know, there's like a high school social hierarchy kind of vibe to that I don't love. If someone really loves our beer and is in town and wants to work with us and brew a beer together, like we're in the driver's seat on most of it because we're the brewery that owns it, I'm probably going to say yes.
Right.
I'd rather say yes than get to know the people better and talk shop than not. For us, I think maybe I'm a little more hesitant when the beer is being brewed by someone else and our name is going to be attached to a beer that we have very little control of and don't gain from financially.
Right. Being discriminate about, obviously you have to be confident that the brewer that you're giving license to slap your name on, that they're, respected, that they have the right processes in place at their facility. And so that's a good point too, that it is quite a bit different to invite someone in your own home and you can control your environment. It's a little bit different.
Totally. And one additional criteria that I'll put in there too, when being discriminated about when you'll play the away game, right? When you go elsewhere and let someone else, let's call it that. And this is from being burned on this a couple of times, and I'm not going to name names because it's really here or there, but is that you spend all this time talking about what the collab's going to be and you show up on the collab day and they've changed things.
Yeah.
And that's a bummer. You're like, what was the point of doing this in the first place? Is this really, that's when I start to get cynical and think it's a marketing thing. It's like, no, you say you ran out of some ingredient or you didn't have the ability to source it. Who knows? There might be exceptions to that, but I've also been in situations where I show up and like, oh, I thought we talked about doing this and that, and none of those things are here. And you're like, oh yeah, we just changed it.
I don't like that either. Yeah, like you said, a lot of work, a lot of planning goes into this stuff, and for good reason. And it's just, we've had that happen before as well. Are there any other stories that you can recall where either things didn't really materialize the way you had hoped, or you had like just an outright bad experience with another brewery or anything? And without naming names, I'm just wondering.
Yeah, not too many. That's the one that comes to mind. There was one instance long ago where we were collaborating with a very large brewery, and we sent a brewer out there to be there for the brew. And when he got there, they're like, "Oh yeah, that's been in the tank now for about 6 hours. You should just go to breakfast."
Oh
And he's like, "Are you
man.
serious?" Yeah. So they just changed the production schedule on him. But look, I also get that. I'm like, the machine doesn't stop for anybody. No time for no
Yeah.
one. Like you're gonna there.
Nothing's in the way of
So
progress when it comes to beer.
I've said, and when we do production collabs and people will say, "Hey, can we come down and be there for part of the day?" Or I'm like, "Yep," they'll just know there's a risk that this might move these hours. We'll try and be, we're not going to shift it up overnight ahead of you, but that machine is a lot harder to move. So I am a little bit sympathetic to that. But yeah, the last minute changes to me is always the worst feeling ones. But again, that doesn't happen too often I think if you're discriminated, if you set that expectation
Yeah,
early.
you know what I can't stand is when you know the brewery that you're visiting doesn't have anything else going on that day, and they still want to mash in at like 5:30 a.m. You're like, really? I'm a marketing guy now. I don't do the 5 a.m. brews anymore.
Here's a pro tip on that front, I think. And I think that, from my opinion, we will still mash in at 5:30 a.m. But I also say, please don't like negative pressure to be there at that point in time.
Well,
unless you
content,
are
though.
a true night.
Like that's what
I think you can get
right.
We wouldn't do that on our pub system. Yeah, like we wouldn't if it was production, we would be able to do. If it was on the pub system, we would probably wait until later in the day just to mash in it all. But even I think we try and create other content elsewhere.
Yeah.
Not every video that we shoot and gets spliced into a reel about a collab necessarily comes from the collab.
True. Very true. But that's how it ends up. It definitely needs to have the appearance of like hyper collaboration at all times. But
yeah.
And so another thing that drives, and this is very common in collabs, is they say they're going to wait for you and they don't. And you're expecting to get something of value in the way of content when you show up and they're like, "Oh, we just started runoff." And you're like, "Okay, that means 90 minutes of standing here, taking photos of the drains, whatever it is."
Maybe this is where we differ on this, because I am like, as a production guy, I'm totally fine with showing up and that being where they're at in the day. I'm like, oh great, we're a little closer to being done. Yeah, I don't have the marketing gene necessarily, so those missed opportunities don't sting as much.
So I just want to go on a little tangent here about the marketing side of things, because, and I it's to turn into a marketing discussion, but as it relates to collabs, we have in general, a really hard time getting cooperation from guys on the production floor when it comes to getting content. And I've been on the floor, and so I know that those are two like very mind spaces that someone to be in, right? One of them is being on the floor and grinding is very left brain, whereas content by nature needs to be creative and right brain, and it's to make those things intersect. And it's downright burdensome sometimes. And I feel that myself as someone capturing content and running our marketing. Do you use that, and do you rely on your brewers to cooperate in that way, or have they pretty much like, don't talk to us? And I think I know the answer based on the number of memes I see on brewery social media where everyone's seen it, where the marketing person walks in and all the brewers stop. But I'd love to hear what you guys run into.
I think that our team is pretty well bought in, actually. I think that if you polled our brewing staff these days, and this is not so much about collabs, more about marketing in general and brewery marketing overlap, I think they would like to see more storytelling. I think that it's probably one of the few things where I think our team would be is very invested in, based on some of the conversations we've had, about getting the story and the visuals and the kind of marketing opportunities out more, to professionalize them more than what we've done. For the size of brewery, we are a very bootstrap operation on the sales and marketing side, and sometimes that shows. And I think sometimes our visuals, our content lacks compared to breweries who are smaller than us, who've simply allocated resources differently. And I think there's a little bit of envy from our team. So I think there's actually a good bit of buy-in around the idea of, hey, that this would help us promote ourselves more, than we should do this. So I don't get a lot of pushback. And then also the people who are in the positions for that sort of content participation are people who probably are more amenable to it than others, right? We have a few folks on our staff who would maybe not make the best interviewees, who might not be the best hosts, but they're great brewers, they're great seller people, they're great packaging folks, whatever. And so it is a skill set, right? And to be social brewer.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's really rare. You can consider yourself lucky if you have people that not just want to be featured out of envy, that want theirs, that you use the storytelling as an example. I think that really to company culture and the pride that especially in product for what they do, the fact that they want their story told means that have bought in, right? Because if they were just showing up to do a job, you really wouldn't have that level of enthusiasm. I consider myself lucky that we have that dilemma.
Yeah, absolutely.
So back to the collab, let's talk real quick about return on investment. Because, and I don't know how it is in Oregon, but at least in the state of California, the brewery that, I'm sorry, I might be misspeaking. This might be a TTB mandate. The brewery that brews the collab, technically, actually, it's the brewery that ferments the beer. But
yeah,
for the sake of simplicity, brewery that brews the beer has exclusive rights to sell the beer. Now, obviously, the exception to that would be, let's say, for example, you've got a full service restaurant and you serve guest beers, and you were to buy those guest beers either from us, if we have self-distribution rights in that state, or from a wholesaler, aka beer distributor, and were to serve it.
Yeah, it's the same setup. We have a little bit different structure in terms of what breweries and brew pub licensees are allowed to do in terms of self-distribution and where you can serve the beer. But in Oregon, fundamentally, the brewery who ferments the beer, who is taxed for the beer by the TTB, is the one who sells the beer at retail, at wholesale. And if you as a partner of ours who happen to be in Oregon are going to make money on that, you're going to have to buy it through normal wholesale chains. There's no discount that you're giving. You're not giving the beer for free. You don't get a cut in it. It is basically as though you're buying a keg of one of our other beers and serving it at your own place, which is totally fine in Oregon.
And we talked earlier about some of the value add with a collab. How do you look at collabs and ROI as more just a fun thing for your brewers to participate in, reveling in the creative spirit of collaborations? Or do you look at them as a real opportunity to sell more beer? Who do you typically target when you go out and sell this beer? I know obviously there's certain retailers that really get excited about collaborations, rotating SKUs, stuff like that, and we know who and when to target them. Do you guys, I'm sure at your size, you have conversations just like that.
Yeah, it was interesting. We did our 15th anniversary this year was the same week. We were started the same week as Boneyard did. And Breakside and Boneyard had never made a beer together. And honestly, Tony Lawrence and I from Boneyard hadn't really thought about that. But then about a year ago, we were like, yeah, we've never done a beer together, but we got our 15th anniversary coming up and maybe we should do something for that. And waited until the 11th hour. I think it was in February or something. I texted him, or we were at an event together, and I was like, maybe we should do this. And that beer, we ended up pulling it off and doing it in cans. We brewed it at Breakside. They did a draft only batch. We did the can and draft version at our place. That took off like crazy. I was one of these ones I was like, holy, like all these other collabs we've done kind of pale in comparison as of late in terms of volume to this. Why is that? Is it because we're two homegrown Oregon breweries who both have fan bases and this is in the Oregon market? Was that what did it? Is that why the mojo was there compared to, say, when we collaborate with a California brewery or with a brewery who we've already done 2 or 3 collabs with in Portland? Was it the novelty of it, the fact that it hadn't been done? I don't really know why certain ones seem to take. So from my perspective, trying to project the idea that we are a friendly, collaborative partner to the industry, right? That we support the craft above all else, right? Breakside has to succeed, but part of that is our support for the industry and the craft. And then the other side of it, meaning that at least personally and for our team, I want us to learn something from every collab we do, right? And from the partners we work with. So that might be something technical or might be something market driven. And those are, but why certain ones seem to go and why other ones don't is still, or don't take as well, it is still beyond me.
Do you think that collabs by nature can help lift up smaller breweries? Do you think there's any truth to that? And what advice would you give to both medium and small breweries looking to build a stronger collab program?
I don't tend to think that I don't think the coattails effect really helps people necessarily, and I don't think it hurts people either. That's maybe just goes back to, I think there's collaborations are ubiquitous enough across craft beer where it doesn't raise any eyebrows if the partner that you have isn't someone that this portion of the population, this demographic is unaware of. Maybe it does benefit some small breweries in a way where someone says, oh, if Breakside lends their credibility to this collab, then that means that maybe this brewery is someone worth checking out. But I don't know that's like gives you a ticket to ride in any particular way. Maybe 15 years ago it might have. Maybe that sort of call out would have helped a lot more. And again, on the flip side of it, I don't think it hurts. But I do think that's why there's just a case for me that a lot of these are relationship based, right? These are collaborations that are meeting the mind of people who have mutual respect for each other's kind of commitment to the craft and their company's mutual commitments to the craft. And why we won't just do a beer. Like, I'm much more likely to say no to someone the less I know them personally.
Yeah.
Regardless of the size of their brewery or the renown of their brewery, if we don't have any kind of personal or professional relationship, and it's a true cold call, the answer probably would be no, because I just don't know enough. But that's less to do with any concern about the calculus of who gets the benefit and more just about the motivation for getting together in the first place and collaborating on something fun in the first place.
Speaking of that, do you find now, 15 years later, and happy anniversary, by the way, do you find that in your current role, it's harder for you to maintain a lot of the relationships and some of the grassroots efforts that you once were participating in?
Yeah, I certainly do. There's certain aspects that are easier. I think that I have a lot easier ability to get away from the brewery if and when I want, right? To do work travel. So I can go to San Diego and do an invitational or fest down there and connect with brewers from out of state and fans from out of state, or GABF, CBC, MBAA, whatever conferences might come up. So all those kind of network and professional obligations amongst kind of other people in the industry on the brewing and supply side are actually in some ways easier, because as we've grown and the roles have become more codified, I don't have obligations that keep me on the floor. I can do a lot of my work remotely if need be. And there's benefits and drawbacks to that, parts of it that I love, parts of it that I don't love, but it's a privileged position to be in. Where I think it has gotten harder and just to maintain is in the local market. I don't do as many events in the home space as I once did. I don't go to the tap takeovers like I used to. I do some still. But yeah, there was a point in time when no one knew us and you just had to hustle. That was my job. I had to do that. And now we have built up a kind of infrastructure where there are people whose job that is. And it's not just an expectation as a side addendum to my role as the head founding brewer. So does that impact our image? Does that impact people's perception of me or of the brand? I don't know. That's an interesting thing to think about. If people feel like there's a disconnect or something like that, when the person who used to do all those events and used to show up for things like that doesn't routinely do that or rarely does that anymore, does that impact relationships? How do you maintain the relationships otherwise? Does it unfairly burden our sales reps who do those things? And do they feel like they are adequately supported in a way to be the brand ambassador? Do people view them with the level of gravitas and seriousness that they ought to give them? So all sorts of things that can come out of that. But yeah, the simple answer is that there's only so many hours in the day, and my main focus still remains to beer in the glass. And so that means that if I'm going to spend more time when I'm in Portland at the brewery it probably means that I'm going to spend less time when I'm in Portland doing ancillary events.
Yeah. So
I think there's probably a piece of this, which is that for folks who are in our seats, right, 15 years, these breweries that are around, that we established our breweries and worked really hard to establish those breweries 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, but those were the nascent years, the form. Yeah, exactly. And I'm not this, I don't think, yeah, but part of me would be like, man, do I have to still do that? Do I still have to hustle to like reintroduce the brand, tell the story? Like, didn't we do that already? Haven't we gotten through that?
yeah.
Isn't that phase done? And when it was 2010 and 2013, doing those types of events and going into accounts and cold calling accounts or checking in with folks and meeting bar managers and telling the story again and again felt like the necessity. It was what you had to do to build the brand. Now the fact that to have to do that seems almost, it's not, it's just, it's seems tiresome, can seem tiresome, but the reality is you have to do it. There's at this point, this moment in craft beer history, with as many breweries there are out there, like you can't rest on your laurels. You can't just sit back and expect that those relationships are going to be maintained, because people change at bar manager positions. They change at wholesaler roles. So you have a ton of turnover and those people don't know us as well. So we have to go back and keep hustling in one way or another. And I think that collabs, going back to the kind of original topic here, offer a great way to reintroduce yourself again and again. Demonstrates your bona fides as a kind of fun participant in the industry, an open and eager member of the community.
I think that is the perfect way to summarize our topic today. Yeah, constant reinvention. And I think collabs I think they do add to that a considerable amount. I think it gets people excited. I think there's something in it for everybody. It's a win-win all the way around. Consumer gets something new and fun. Both breweries stand to gain, whether it's financially or otherwise, and it's good for the industry. And having said all that, want to give you, Mr. Ben Edmunds, a chance to talk about whatever you guys have going on that you'd like our listening audience to know about. What can we expect from Breakside Brewing in the coming months?
It's almost harvest, so we'll have 11 different fresh hop beers hitting taps this fall. Yeah, 7 in cans and on draft, 4 that are draft only. All Oregon grown hops. We have great relationships with the farms that are only about 25 minutes from where we brew most of our beer in Oregon. So those beers will start hitting draft probably around the 29th of August, maybe the 25th, depending on when Strata Harvest starts. And then we'll have those beers available ongoing throughout September and into October. So if you happen to be in the Northwest or anywhere our beer is sold, keep an eye out for those. They're such a special treat. They're really one of the most exceptional products that come out of the Northwest in terms of beer annually, and they're only available for a short time. So that's probably the biggest thing that we have coming up. And yeah, well, you can follow us at Breakside Brews on Instagram, Facebook, all the social media platforms. And thanks for having me.
Of course, it was really fun. And thanks for joining. As always, you're the consummate pro, and we really love what you guys are doing out there. This beer was really fun to brew. For everyone listening or watching, if you haven't had a chance to try this, you can find it. We brewed at our facilities. You're going to go to motherearthbrewco.com and to the beer finder, and you can pop your zip in or just look at an interactive map. It'll show you exactly where to pick it up. This is the Mother Earth Breakside Collaboration IPA, and it is yummy. Thanks again, Ben.
Yeah, thank you.
One, buddy. Bye-bye. Like what you see? There's more where that came from. Check out our other content or find us wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to drop a comment and let us know what topics you'd like to see covered on the Craft Equation.